Picture a queen so frightening that 5 centuries after her death, children still dare each other to stand in dark bathrooms and say her name 3 times into a mirror. Now add a cocktail named for the blood she spilled. Add 300 human beings burned alive in 4 years. Add a nickname so effective that most people cannot tell you her real one. Now walk past the mirror. Walk down a brick corridor at Hampton Court Palace, through a guarded door that only a handful of people in all of England are permitted to open, and look at what the legend actually was up close. A small, nearsighted woman kneeling on a cold floor at 4 a.m, praying out loud to a god she feared had stopped listening, while in the next room a carved oak cradle stood waiting for a child who did not exist. That's Queen Mary I, Bloody Mary, the most hated name in English history and one of the loneliest human beings who ever wore a crown. A woman who could sign the papers that sent men to the fire in the morning, and that same evening lose at cards to her own servants, and pay her losses out of a velvet purse, laughing, asking after their mothers by name. We're going back there tonight, not as historians arguing over her body count, and not as tourists shuffling past her portrait. We're going in through the servants' door, 4 years, 1 pair of eyes, at a distance of about 6 feet from the Queen of England, which is closer than any ambassador, any bishop or any husband ever stood for long. One honest thing before we begin, because this channel keeps its promises. The rooms in this story are real, the dates are real, the cradle is real, the pre-signed letters are real, the account books are real, and where a detail comes from an ambassador's dispatch or a diary, or a household memory written down years later, I'll tell you so as we go, and I'll tell you where documentation ends and legend begins. But the eyes I'm lending you tonight belong to no single person. They are stitched together from the real women who served in that chamber and left their traces in the wage lists and the wardrobe books. The Queen is documented. Her servant tonight is borrowed. So, I make these long history stories, and at this point I honestly can't tell whether you use them to fall asleep or whether you're all just weirdos who want to hear about the birth announcement letters a queen signed for a baby that was never born. I've stopped trying to figure it out. Either way, subscribe if you feel like it. Get comfortable. Here we go. The Queen of England's sleeve is lying across your lap, and the first thing you know about this night is the smell. Burnt rush. That's the little light you're working by, a dried reed dipped in mutton fat, held in an iron pinch clip, and it smells like a poor man's kitchen, which is a strange smell to be breathing in the richest few rooms in England. Under the rush, mutton fat faintly rancid. Under the fat, cold stone and river damp because the Thames is 30 yards away and it gets into everything by November. And under all of it, very faint beeswax and rosewater and ambergris, which is the smell of the Queen herself, soaked into the tawny velvet in your hands, the way smoke soaks into a cook. Your needle is threaded with silk the colour of dried blood. Your fingers are so cold you can barely feel it. And through the wall, 6 feet away, a woman is praying out loud. She's been praying for 4 hours. You know it has been 4 hours because the great clock over the gatehouse struck midnight when she began, and it has struck 4 since, and the clock does not lie. It was made for this palace 14 years ago by a Frenchman named Nicolas Orsian, and it shows the hour, the month, the phases of the moon, and the time of high water at London Bridge. Because in this England the river is the only road that matters, and even the Queen's clock must keep one eye on the tide. The voice through the wall rises and falls. Latin mostly. Some of it you know from the chapel. Some of it is not from any service. Some of it is just a woman talking low and urgent, the way you would talk to someone standing in front of you who was refusing to answer. You keep your eyes on the sleeve. This is the first rule, and nobody had to teach it to you twice. Quiet hands, quiet face. You are a chamberer in the privy lodgings of Queen Mary of England, in the small hours of a November night in the year 1554, and everything you hear through these walls could end you. Not because anyone thinks you're a spy, because a girl who repeats what a queen says to God at 4 a.m. is worth more to certain men downstairs than a girl who doesn't. And the moment you become worth something to those men, you are already halfway to a cell. You have seen it happen. A laundress, gone between Tuesday and a Thursday and nobody said her name again. So you listen without listening. You hear without hearing. Walls teach you that. This whole palace is a school for it. The work in your lap is its own small danger. The sleeve is tawny velvet sewn with seed pearls, dozens of them, each one stitched down with 2 passes of silk, and this evening, when you undressed her, 1 pearl came away in your hand. Just one, smaller than a pea. It sat in your palm like a tooth. A pearl off the Queen's sleeve is not a pearl, it is an inventory line. Every gown, every sleeve, every pair of embroidered gloves in this household is written in the wardrobe books, checked and countersigned, and a chamberer whose watch loses a pearl is a chamberer who might have sold a pearl, and a chamberer who might have sold a pearl is looking for a new life by Lady Day. Mistress Clarencius told you that on your first morning, without any particular menace, the way you'd tell someone the river has currents. So you are sewing it back. Now. Tonight. Before the sleeve is called for at dawn, before anyone counts. 2 passes of silk through the pearl's drilled eye, a third for your own piece, and a knot so small it could hide under your fingernail. The rushlight spits. Your breath fogs. And through the wall the voice stops. You go still. Needle up. The whole room seems to lean toward the silence. Then it begins again. Lower now. Barely a murmur, and you recognize the shape of it even without the words, because you have heard it every night for weeks. She's praying for the child. That is the thing nobody outside these rooms will believe. Not in 400 years, not ever. The most feared woman in England spends her nights on her knees, begging. And you, 17 years old, with cold fingers and a stolen back pearl, are one of perhaps 8 people alive who know it. Welcome to the Privy Chamber of Mary Tudor. Welcome to the winter of 1554 at Hampton Court and Whitehall and St. James's, in the 3rd-year rooms like this have been called hers, in the 1st year of her marriage, in the 5th month of the pregnancy that all Europe is watching. Stay close to the wall. Keep your voice down. And whatever you hear tonight, learn to have never heard it. Your name is Cicely Ward. You're 17 years old, you were born in Rochester in Kent, and you've been inside these rooms since the last week of August, which is 10 weeks, which is long enough to know the rules and not nearly long enough to stop being afraid of them. You are here because of your mother. That is how every place in this household is filled, not by talent, but by memory. Your mother, before you were born, spent 4 years as a sewing woman in the household of Catherine of Aragon, the old queen, the one this queen still calls, quietly, my lady mother. When Mary Tudor came to her throne, she did something no one expected and everyone in your family will talk about until they die. She sent for the old names, women who had served her mother, women who had stood by her in the years when standing by her was dangerous. Some were dead, some were too old. Your mother was too ill to travel and too proud to say so, and so she wrote a letter, and the letter was read, and a place was found for the daughter. You arrived with one wooden box, one change of linen, your mother's silver thimble, and a needle case of stiff red leather with 11 needles in it, which is your fortune and your trade. For this you are paid £10 by the year, in quarters, which is more money than your father the wherry builder sees, and you are fed, and you're given livery cloth at Christmas, and you sleep on a straw pallet that you share with another chamberer, a Norfolk girl called Marjorie, in a passage room directly outside the Queen's bedchamber door. You sleep in your clothes. You sleep in a sense that'll take too long to explain to anyone back in Rochester. Professionally, half of you listening all night for the little silver bell she keeps on the table by her bed. And when I say you serve in the privy chamber, I need you to understand what that word means in 1554. This isn't a job title. It's a wall. The word privy just means private, and the court is built like a target, ring inside ring. Outside the great courtyards, where anyone decently dressed can stand and gawk. Then the great hall which Cardinal Wolsey's men raised before this queen was born and King Henry rebuilt, 106 feet long and 40 wide, where hundreds are fed daily in shifts. Then the watching chamber with its guards. Then the presence chamber with its empty throne that men bow to even when no one is sitting in it. And then the door, the privy lodgings, bedchamber, closet, oratory, the little gallery where she walks when it rains. Past that door, England believes is majesty. Past that door you now know is a woman with headaches. The door itself is kept by the Queen's own choice of people, and here Mary Tudor did another thing no one expected. She filled her privy chamber with women. Her father's privy chamber was men, gentlemen, the sword and swagger sort. Hers is a room of skirts and low voices, and it is run in every way that matters by Mistress Susan Clarencius, keeper of the Queen's robes, a widow somewhere past 50 with a face like a well-kept ledger, who has served Mary Tudor for more than 20 years, since the days when serving her was a good way to be questioned by the council. There is nothing about the Queen that Mistress Clarencius does not know. There is almost nothing about Mistress Clarencius that anyone knows at all. On your first morning she looked at you for a long moment, at your scrubbed hands and your terrified curtsy, and gave you the whole of your education in 4 sentences. You will be early. You will be clean. You will be silent. A pause while she straightened a fold of cloth that did not need straightening. And you will remember that we serve the body, not the crown. The crown has servants enough. You didn't understand that last part, you said so. Marjorie says that's the bravest thing you'll ever do in this room. Mistress Clarencius didn't smile, but something shifted in the ledger of her face. The crown, she said, is served by great men for great reasons, and every one of those reasons has a price on it. We wash her, we dress her, we warm her sheets and hold her head when it aches. The body is not political, girl. Keep to the body and you will grow old in this service. Meddle with the crown and you will not. Serve the body, not the crown. You'll hear her say it a dozen times in 4 years. It will take you most of those 4 years to understand that it is not a rule of humility. It is a rule of survival from a woman who survived the most dangerous household in England for 20 years, and it has a cold side she did not say out loud. The body can be loved. The crown cannot afford to be. Your days have a shape, and the shape never changes. Only the hours move with the light. You are up before dawn, before the palace, when the only sounds are the river and the scrape of the night soil men. You fetch the washing water which comes to this palace. and you had to be told this twice before you believed it, through lead pipes from a spring at Coombe Hill more than 3 miles away, crossing under the Thames itself in pipes laid on the riverbed. Water that crosses under a river to reach a queen. Your entire village drinks from a well 20 paces from the churchyard. You lay out the shift, the petticoats, the kirtle, the gown, the sleeves, the hood, in the order they will be wanted, because dressing a queen is a liturgy, and you do not improvise in a liturgy. You mend, you brush, you air the bedchamber, shake the feather beds, smooth the sheets. You carry things endlessly through the little back passages that visitors never see, the servants' vanes of the palace, so that the staterooms can pretend that everything in them appeared by magic. You eat your dinner standing in a passage off the household hall, out of the way quickly, and that is the first and last this story will say about food, because a servant's meals were the one part of her day that had nothing of the queen in them, and you stand, hours of it, along the wall, hands folded, face quiet, while great persons come and go. You are furniture that breathes. A lady once handed you her wet cloak without ever once letting her eyes touch your face, and Marjorie afterwards said, "There, now you've been properly introduced to the court." Marjorie has been in the household 2 years, which makes her your senior, your schoolmistress, and the nearest thing to a sister you've ever had. She is 19, sharp-tongued, freckled, and completely unimpressed by anything except money and lapdogs. She sleeps like the dead on her half of the pallet, and swears the Queen's bell has a pitch that reaches into her dreams. It's Marjorie who teaches you the real geography of the palace, which stairs are watched, which gallery echoes, which gentleman usher will report you for laughing, and which one sells wine out the buttery window. It's Marjorie who teaches you the arithmetic of service, that your £10 a year is riches in Rochester and poverty at court, where a single yard of the velvet you brush every morning costs more than £1, where the gown on the Queen's back would buy your father's boatyard twice, and where you will none the less die of shame if your cuffs are dirty. And it's Marjorie, that first week, who leans close while you're both scouring candle wax off a floor and gives you the other rule, the one Mistress Clarencius would never say. "Whatever you think about her," she murmurs, not looking up, "have it silently. There's them downstairs that hate her, and them that would die for her, and both sorts are listening. Quiet hands, quiet face. Quiet hands, quiet face." You will say it to yourself so many times in these rooms that it will wear a groove in you, like a path worn across grass. Because here is the thing you understand within days, the thing that nobody outside the door understands at all. They are all watching her. The whole world. Spain, France, Rome, the Emperor. Every ambassador in London pays good silver for scraps of what happens in these rooms, what she eats, whether she sleeps, whether she weeps, whether the child in her stirs. And the only people who actually see, the only people in creation who know what the most watched woman in Europe is like when the door shuts, are a handful of women with cold hands and £10 a year. You see. And what you see from the very first week is not what England sees. England sees a queen. What you see on your first full morning in the bedchamber is a small woman of 38 sitting on the edge of a vast bed, feet not quite reaching the floor, pressing the heels of both hands against her eyes. She is thin. That surprises you. The portraits pad her. Her hair, out of its hood, is a faded red-brown going grey at the temples, and it is thinning, and you will learn to dress it so that this does not show. Her face is pale and lined beyond its years, and it wears, in repose, an expression you've only ever seen before on women at the doors of sick rooms, someone braced, someone permanently listening for bad news. Then Mistress Clarencius says quietly, "The water, Majesty," and the Queen lifts her head, and the bracing vanishes so completely that you wonder if you invented it, and she says good morning to the room in a voice that stops you where you stand, because the voice is enormous, deep, almost like a man's, rough-grained, far too big for the body it lives in. The Venetian ambassador will write home about that voice, in a dispatch that still survives. A voice deep and loud, he tells his masters, so that when she speaks she is always heard a long way off. The first time she directs a sentence at you, some small kindness about your mother, whom she remembers, whom she asks after by name, you very nearly drop the ewer. And here is the second surprise. She looks at you from about a foot away. Everything with her happens at a foot away. Papers, books, faces, needlework. She is so short-sighted that the world beyond arm's reach is fog to her, and she will not wear a glass in company, and so she has spent her whole life pulling things close. Letters, ambassadors, servants, holding them near her face with a frown of effort that strangers read as fury. Half the terrifying stare of Bloody Mary, you realise in your first week, is a woman trying to see. The headaches come with the eyes, or the eyes come with the headaches. The physicians argue about it in Latin and cure nothing. She is ill in some way most of the time. This is not a secret in the household. It is the weather of the household. Her women speak of her old guest, the illness that visits every autumn and winter, that has visited since she was a girl, the crushing pain behind the eyes, the sleeplessness, the beating heart, the melancholy that sits on her chest like water. The old complaint, the doctors call it, the trouble of the mother, by which they mean the womb, because in 1554 every pain a woman has is eventually blamed on the womb. She has been bled for it, dosed for it, prayed over for it since she was 15. You will hold the basin. You will learn exactly how she likes the cloth on her forehead, wrung out in rose water, not dripping, folded in 3. And you will learn what the household has always known, and history will take 400 years to say plainly, that she weeps, often, privately, or what a queen must call privately, meaning in front of you. Sometimes at letters, sometimes at nothing you can see. She weeps the way she prays with her whole strength, and then she washes her face and goes out to the presence chamber, and is a king's daughter for 10 hours, and if you had only ever seen her out there, you would never believe the rest of it existed. There are 2 women in that body. You will think this 100 times in 4 years. There is the Queen, and there is Mary, and the door of the privy chamber is the line between them, and your entire employment consists of tending the one the world is never allowed to meet. But I don't want you to imagine these rooms as a hospital, because that would be its own kind of lie, and this story only deals in the documented truth of her, which is stranger and sadder and warmer than the legend in every direction at once. Because the same woman is, behind that door, very good company. She loves clothes with a plain, unembarrassed greed, and always has. The wardrobe books groan with it. Cloth of gold, crimson velvet, purple satin, French gowns, Venetian sleeves, furs. She loves jewels more. She'll stand at the window turning a stone in the light for a quarter of an hour, holding it close to those failing eyes, perfectly happy. She loves fine, small things generally. Clocks, embroidery, illuminated books of hours, anything exquisite and exact. She gambles. This one still makes you smile. The account books of her years as a princess survive to this day, and among the entries for alms and wages and lute strings again and again, in a clerk's patient hand, lost at cards. The habit came with her to the throne. On winter evenings the card table comes out in the privy chamber, and she plays with her women for real stakes and loses with real annoyance and pays with real coin. And one evening in your first month shorter player, she looks around the room and her eye lands on you, flat against the wall trying to be furniture, and that enormous voice says, "The little Kentish one, does she play?" You play. Your hands shake so badly the first hand that Marjorie has to sort your cards for you under the table. You lose fourpence you cannot afford, and the Queen of England, gathering her winnings like a good wife at a fair, tells the room that Kent breeds honest losers, and laughs, and the laugh is loud and short and real. And afterward Mistress Clarencius, passing behind you, murmurs, "Now you have seen her. Remember this one too. Remember this one too, because it is already clear to you 10 weeks in that a day is coming when you will need to. There is music. That is her deepest comfort after God, and it is her mother's inheritance and her father's too. Whatever else can be said of King Henry, he filled his daughter's childhood with musicians. She was famous across Europe before she was 10 years old for her skill at the virginals, a keyboard small enough to sit on a table, and ambassadors were brought in to marvel at the tiny girl making that bright rain of notes. There is a pair of virginals in the privy chamber now, inlaid wood, kept in tune by a man who comes each fortnight and touches it like a relic. Some evenings she plays. She has to lean close to see the keys, and her hands, which ache in the cold, are slower than her fame. But you have stood with the warming pan in your arms, forgetting to move, while the most hated woman in England played alone in the half-dark, perfectly absorbed 20 years of grief, lifted off her face for the length of a pavane. Remember the virginals. Like the pearl on the tawny sleeve, they will come back at the end of this story, and I would rather you were not ready for it. And she is kind. I want to be careful here, because this channel does not deal in whitewash, and before this night is over, we will stand downwind of Smithfield and call things by their names. But the record is the record, and the record of the private woman is a record of persistent, particular, unglamorous kindness, and her servants, who knew her best, were the last people in England to stop saying so. The privy purse tells it plainly. Money to a poor woman at the gate, money to a man whose house burned, money, wages, and a pension to Jane, called Jane the Fool, her fool, a woman kept in the household not as mockery but in something very close to honour, whose gowns and shoes and bedding all march through. The account books, year after year, right down to the barber paid to shave her head, which was the fashion for fools and the mark of her office. Jane goes where the Queen goes. She's small and round and says whatever enters her head, which in this household makes her the only person with a licence to tell the truth, and the Queen laughs at her the way she laughs at no duchess. And godchildren, this is the detail that undoes you a little. Even now, it is documented past all argument. For decades, this woman has stood godmother to the children of her servants, and of perfectly ordinary people, dozens upon dozens of them. A guardsman's daughter here, a gardener's son there, each one with its christening gift faithfully entered in the accounts. The most feared name in England, sponsor to half the cradles of her own back stairs. The truth you are learning stitch by stitch in your first cold winter in her service is that this Queen is easy to love from 6 feet away and impossible to defend from 6 miles, and that every woman in the privy chamber lives stretched across that distance, and so, from tonight, do you. To understand the woman through the wall, you have to be told what was done to her, and in your first winter it is Mistress Clarencius who tells you, in pieces, over mending, in the flat voice of a woman reciting an inventory of damage she witnessed personally. The Queen was born on the 18th of February in the year 1516 at Greenwich, the only living child of King Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, after year upon year of dead ones. And for a while, Mistress Clarencius says, she was the sun. Her father carried her about the court in his arms, showing her off to ambassadors. This child never cries, he boasted. She had her own household, her own council, a court at Ludlow as Princess of Wales in all but name, musicians, tutors, silks, the little girl at the virginals, applauded by Europe. Then her mother grew old in a decade of failed childbeds, and her father wanted a son, and wanted Anne Boleyn, and wanted his marriage of 20 years declared to have never existed. You know this story. All England knows this story. What England knows less well is what it looked like from inside a 15-year-old girl. In 1531 they separated her from her mother, not dramatically, administratively. The households were kept apart and then kept farther apart, and the visits were refused, and then the letters were watched, and the two of them, mother and daughter, the two most stubborn Catholics in England, never saw each other's faces again. Ever. 6 years the mother lived on, moved from damp house to damper house, begging in letter after letter to be allowed her daughter, if only to have her physicians treat the girl, and the answer was always no, because the king and his new men understood exactly how strong those two women were together, and exactly how much weaker they were apart. In 1533 came the Act with the tidy legal language, and the girl who had been Princess of Wales in all but name was informed that she was and had always been a bastard. She was 17. Her household was dissolved. Her jewels were inventoried and taken. And then, and Mistress Clarencius's voice goes flatter still on this part, because she was there, the king sent his bastardized daughter to serve in the household of the new baby, Elizabeth. To serve. The Lady Mary, lately princess, riding at the tail of her infant half-sister's train, given the worst chamber in the house, baited daily by the woman set over that household, told that if she insisted on calling herself princess, she would be beaten like the bastard she was. She was ill constantly in those years. This is where the old guest first moved in. The autumn sicknesses, the headaches, the heart that races at night. The king's own physician, allowed to see her at last, said plainly that sorrow was half her disease. She was 20, and she wrote her letters in fear, and buried her mother in 1536 from a distance, forbidden the funeral, and that same year her father's men came at her with a paper. The paper said her mother's marriage had been incestuous and unlawful. It said she herself was base-born. It said her father was supreme head of the church in England and the Pope a foreign bishop with no authority. And she was to sign it, or the men around her would begin to die, and perhaps not only they. She held out for weeks. Her friends' lives were laid on the table one by one. And late one night in June 1536, 20 years old, sick, alone, browbeaten by the council and terrified for the people who loved her, she signed. All of it. Her mother's shame, her own bastardy, her God's demotion, in one signature, without reading it a final time because she could not bear to. Mistress Clarencius bites off her thread. People marvel that she prays 4 hours in the night, she says. They should marvel it is only 4. You do not answer. You're learning. Quiet hands, quiet face. But now you know what you're listening to through the wall. Not piety. Repair. A woman who has spent 18 years trying to unsay one signature, who believes her mother's God was betrayed by her own hand, and who now, at last, impossibly, has the power to make it right, and who is therefore in a hurry in a way that no healthy soul is ever in a hurry. Everything England will suffer in the 4 years you serve her, and everything she herself will suffer, which is the subject of this story, flows out of that one night in 1536, like heat out of a cracked stove. That is the woman. Now the marriage, because you arrived in the middle of it, and the marriage is the door through which all the rest of this story walks. She was crowned in October 1553, 37 years old, after half a lifetime of being nobody, after facing down an armed attempt to keep her from the throne, and the country that crowned her expected her to do what queens do, marry and produce an heir. Her choice landed on Philip of Spain, son of the Emperor, 11 years her junior, the most eligible and most hated match in Europe. Hated here, I mean. England wanted no Spanish king, and said so. There was a rising against the marriage within months, and it reached the gates of the palace before it died, and she faced that down too, with a speech at the Guildhall in that enormous voice. Before ever she saw him, they sent her his portrait, and they sent her a gift, a great table diamond, a flat-cut stone the size of a thumbnail from the emperor sealing the betrothal. Ambassadors priced it in awed letters. She wears it often. You have held it in its velvet box, while Mistress Clarencius dressed her hair, and it is heavy in a way that has nothing to do with weight. Keep that diamond somewhere in the back of your mind tonight. It has 2 more appearances to make in this story, and the last one will be on a list. They were married in July 1554 at Winchester, in a ceremony you know only from the talk of the household, 2 days after she first saw his actual face. And here is the fact that every servant in the privy chamber learned within a fortnight of the wedding, and that the Venetian ambassador in London worked out soon enough and put into his dispatches, which is why I can say it to you tonight as documented truth and not gossip. She fell in love with him. Completely. At 38, for the first time in a starved life, with all the unspent tenderness of 20 years, this rigid, wounded, formidable woman fell in love with her own arranged husband. And he was kind to her and courteous to her in public and in private. And he did not love her, and everyone could see both halves of it at once. And there are few sadder arrangements available to human beings than that one. You see them together all that winter. He comes to her rooms with his gentleman, there is music. She is, Marjorie says, 10 years younger in his company, and it is true. She watches him the way you watch a fire in a cold room. He treats her with a patient, formal gentleness that never once, in all the hours you stand against those walls, warms into anything you could call ease. His gentlemen are bored in England and let it show. She learns Spanish phrases for him. She has his portrait hung where she can see it from her writing table, close, where her eyes still work. In September, the physicians confirm what she has already told Mistress Clarencius through tears. Tears of joy, the first of that kind you have ever helped dry. The Queen is with child. And in the last week of November 1554, the whole palace, the whole country, seems to tip toward hope at once, like a field bending under one wind. On the 24th, Cardinal Reginald Pole comes home, another of the wounded, this one, her mother's kinsman, exiled 20 years for defying her father, his own mother beheaded for his defiance, and now rode up the Thames in state to be met like the past itself returning. And when he greets the Queen, he says words that are set down in more than one account, words from the Gospel, the angel's words, "Blessed art thou among women." And she believes, and the whole court believes, that at that greeting she felt the child leap in her womb. The bells begin. On the 28th a Te Deum is sung at St. Paul's for the quickening of the Queen, and on the 30th of November, in the great chamber at Whitehall, with Lords and Commons on their knees, Cardinal Pole, by authority of the Pope, absolves the entire realm of England of its schism, and receives it back into the Roman Church, and men who knelt there wrote that there was open weeping, and you do not doubt it, because you have to help undress a queen that night who is trembling like a plucked string, who says to no one, to the room, to God, that against all reason the thing is done, the signature is unsaid, the mother is answered. 18 years she has waited to feel what she feels that night. Hold on to it. Because this is the top of the hill, the 22 months you're about to live through, from that November night to a certain morning at Hampton Court, are the ones that put the sorrow into every account her servants ever gave of her, and the household is about to learn that there are worse things than grief. There is hope, arriving in a nursery with carpenters. Christmas at court that year is the brightest anyone can remember. Masks, music, the halls dressed in holly and ivy, the Queen visibly rounding, visibly happy, sitting beside her Spanish husband with her hand resting on her belly in front of everyone, which for a woman of her rigid modesty is practically a proclamation. Jane the Fool is everywhere that season, in a new gown from the accounts, shaved head shining, mimicking the Spanish gentlemen's walk behind their backs until even Mistress Clarencius has to turn and cough. The court gambles and dances. The Queen wins at cards for once and is triumphant about it for 2 days. You are run off your feet and almost warm and almost easy, and it is that Christmas tide that you first properly meet the other 2 women you need for this story, because both of them will still be there at the end of it, and both of them are real, wage-listed, documented women, not inventions of mine. The first is Jane Dormer. 16 that winter, of good family, and so beautiful and so serious at once, that the household joke she was issued to the maids of honour by mistake and belongs among the relics. The Queen loves her outright. Jane reads to her in the evenings, holds her carding when her hands ache, and is one of the few young creatures whose chatter never tires her. Perhaps because Jane's grandmother served her mother, and so Jane, like you, like half this chamber, is memory made flesh. Years from now, in another country, an old woman, she will still be telling her household what her queen was like behind the door, and one of her people will write it down, and through that manuscript half of what the world knows softly about Mary Tudor will descend. Remember Jane. She is the one who remembers. The second is Mistress Frideswed Strelly, and she is harder to describe, because her gift is the absence of performance. A gentlewoman of the chamber, middle-aged, dry, economical of speech, with a habit of pausing a half-second before she answers any question, as if privately checking the truth of her reply against stock. The Queen trusts her the way you trust a beam you have tested. Marjorie puts it differently. Strelley's the only one of us who'd say the same words in this room and on the rack. You laugh when she says it. You will not laugh in 2 years when you understand what those words cost and what they were worth. Watch Strelley. In the whole of this story, which is a story about a woman surrounded by people telling her what she longed to hear, Frideswide Strelley is the one who doesn't. In January, the preparations begin in earnest, because the child is reckoned due in the spring, and a royal birth is not an event, it is a campaign. You see the cradle before almost anyone in England. It comes up by river, crated, and is uncrated in the gallery, and the women stand around it in a hush that has nothing of ceremony in it, and everything of hunger. It is oak, richly carved, swung between turned posts so it can rock, wide enough, you think stupidly, for a child of 3, because royal babies are swaddled deep in ermine and velvet, and along its edge, cut into the wood by someone's patient chisel, runs a rhyme, an English prayer, and Mistress Clarencius reads it aloud once, slowly, for the women who have no letters. The child which thou to Mary, O Lord of might, hast send, to England's joy, in health preserve, keep, and defend. That verse is documented word for word. Someone composed it, and someone approved it, and someone carved it. Hour after hour, every stroke of it certain. The cradle is set up in the nursery apartments being fitted at Hampton Court, and I want you to keep your eye on it exactly the way you keep your eye on the pearl and the diamond and the virginals. Because of all the objects in this story, the cradle is the one that history has never been able to look at steadily. Even now, even from 500 years away. Then there are the letters, and the letters you are never supposed to have seen at all. It happens in April, at Hampton Court, in the week the court moves there for the lying in. You are carrying candles to the Queen's closet, the small room where she writes, and a secretary is gathering papers at the desk, and because he is clumsy and you are quick, you catch a sheet as it slides, and you hold it just long enough. It is a letter announcing the birth of the Queen's child, written out fair, in a clerk's best hand, to some king or cardinal, announcing the happy delivery of a prince, except that where the date should be, there is a blank, and in the wording that gives the child there is a space held open, so that son can be made daughter with a stroke if God disappoints only slightly. And at the bottom, already, complete, unmistakable, seen 100 times on warrants and inventories, the Queen's own signature. There is a stack of them, addressed across Europe, signed, sealed to travel, waiting only for a fact. The secretary takes the sheet from your hands without a word, and you go out with your candles and you stand in the passage for a moment with your heart going like a rabbit's, not because you were caught, but because of what the paper was. You are 17, and you cannot say why it frightens you. From here, I can say it for you. Those letters are hope, executed in advance, with the blank where reality is supposed to enter. They exist because it does not occur to anyone that reality might refuse. Several of them still exist today, blanks and all, in the archives, and they are among the most quietly unbearable documents of the whole Tudor age. And you, tonight, are one of the few people who knows the Queen has already signed her name under news that has not happened. Quiet hands, quiet face. You tell no one, not even Marjorie. The court that gathers at Hampton Court that April of 1555 for the lying in is a city holding its breath. By custom, the Queen takes to her chamber a month before the reckoned time. A ceremony of enclosure, the rooms hung dark with tapestry and arras, until hardly a needle of daylight enters, because the physicians hold that light, and noise are perilous to a birthing queen. The men banished, the government of the innermost world handed entire to women. Midwives are lodged, rockers are appointed, actual salaried women whose whole office is to rock. Wet nurses are chosen, Linen is stacked in the nursery in white bales, and you have never in your life seen so much fine linen in one place. And into the darkened chamber, in the last days of April, comes the whole weight of everything this story has told you so far. Because understand what this child is to her. It is not an heir, or not only, it is the proof. Proof that God has forgiven the signature of 1536. Proof that the husband will stay, for the husband's father has made no secret that Philip remains in England for the child. Proof that her body, sick and sorrowful for 20 years, mocked and pitied and discussed in ambassadors' ciphers across Europe, can do the one thing her whole world was built to demand of a queen. Every torment this woman has, every scar you have learned by rushlight, has been gathered by fate into a single question with a single date attached. She's 39 years old. The midwives smile and smile. Down in the courtyards the wet nurses are waiting, and the rockers practice on the empty cradle, a soft push, oak on rush matting, a sound like a slow oar. You hear it down the gallery, that sound, in the quiet hours. You will hear it the rest of your life. But before we go into that darkened chamber and wait with her, this story has to stop and turn and look at the thing it has been keeping at the edge of your eye. Because this channel does not sell you comfortable history, and the same winter that carved a prayer into a cradle lit the fires at Smithfield, and her servants lived inside both facts at once, and so, tonight, will you. It begins in February 1555, while the court is still bright with the quickening. The old heresy laws have been revived by Parliament, and on the 4th of February at Smithfield, the open ground beyond the city wall where the horse fairs are held, a preacher named John Rogers, a translator of the English Bible, a married man with 11 children, is burned alive for his faith, the first of the reign. You are not there. You will never be there in the 4 years of this story, and neither will she, and I'm not going to take you there tonight, because you are trying to sleep, and because the truth this story owns is not the fire itself, but what the fire does to the house you serve in. What I will tell you is the number, because the number is documented and evasion is a kind of lie. Before this reign ends, over the space of less than 4 years, around 280 men and women will die that way in England. Weavers and clergymen, apprentices, blind girls. It is the fact of the reign. It is why the mirror name exists. What you know of it, inside the privy lodgings, comes the way weather comes. It comes as talk in the household hall that stops when chamber servants enter, because everyone knows where you work. It comes as Marjorie, white around the mouth, back from visiting her cousin in the city, sitting down on the pallet and not being sharp-tongued about anything at all for a whole evening, and finally saying to the ceiling, "The wind was off Smithfield and nothing else ever." It comes when the court lies at St. James's or Whitehall and the wind sits in the east, as something on the air that's not wood smoke, that everyone recognises and no one names, drifting over the gardens where the rosemary is clipped, over the tilt yard, through the open windows of galleries hung with cloth of gold, the finest rooms in England, and the weather itself arrives pre-accused. And here is what you can testify to, the only thing you can testify to, because you see her every day of it. She believes it is right. That is the terrible centre of her, and her servants knew it before any historian did, and it cannot be softened, so I will not soften it. This is the woman of the 4-hour prayers. She believes heresy is a plague that kills souls forever, that a sovereign who tolerates it damns her people, that mercy to the preacher is cruelty to his flock. She has believed it since the signature of 1536, whose whole meaning was that truth can be tortured out of shape by kindness to oneself. The men around her, and this is documented, sometimes urge caution, the Spanish churchmen among them, worried it will sour the country. It is not policy running ahead of her. You have seen her pray. The prayers and the fires come from the same place, and that, not any cackling cruelty, is what her household understood and could never say. The most tormented conscience in England had been given a stake and a match. You are 17, and you settle it in yourself the way servants have always settled such things, in pieces imperfectly at night. You think of the woman who asks after your mother by name. You think of the smell on the east wind. You hold both. They do not resolve. Mistress Clarencius, the only time you ever come near asking, looks at you for a long moment over the mending and says, "We serve the body, not the crown." And for the first time you hear the whole of what that sentence is for. It is a place to stand. It is the smallest room in the house of conscience, and she has lived in it for 20 years, and now she is showing you where it is, because you will need somewhere to stand for 4 more. And the same account books that pay the household through that winter go on recording, in the same clerk's hand, the alms, the gate money to widows, the christening gifts, the pension to Jane the Fool. History will spend centuries trying to decide which column of that ledger was the real woman. Her servants knew the answer, and the answer is the reason this episode exists. Both, all the way down. That is what nobody wants, and what everyone who stood within 6 feet of her got. Now come back up the dark gallery, past the guards, through the door, into the hush of the hung tapestries, where the only light is candles at noon, and the empty cradle answers the rocker's hands with its slow oar-stroke. It is the last week of April 1555, and on the last day of April, England catches fire with joy instead. It starts, as far as anyone can ever trace it afterward, as a rumour slipping out of the palace at dawn, riding down the river to the city faster than any messenger. The Queen is delivered, a prince, born a little before midnight, and mother and child both well. London goes up like a hayrick. The bells begin, parish after parish, until the whole city is one clanging roar. Shops shut. Bonfires are dragged into the streets in broad daylight. Te Deum is sung at churches round the city. Preachers announce it from pulpits as fact, with details, the hour of the birth, the sex, the child's fairness, details being invented even as the mouths open, because that is what hunger does with a rumour. A London diarist, a merchant tailor named Henry Mackean, who kept a chronicle of these years that survives to this day, wrote it all down. The bells rung, the fires lit, the tables of celebration set out for the birth of a prince who, he then had to record, quote, turned out otherwise to the pleasure of God. Because at Hampton Court, where you're standing in a passage with a stack of warmed linen in your arms, listening to distant Kingston ringing across the water, nothing has happened. There is no prince. There has not even been a labour. The rumour was born of the waiting itself, the way marshlight is born of marsh, and by evening the couriers have gone out with the denial, and the bonfires die in the streets, embarrassed, and the bells trail off one by one, and the city tells itself the reckoning was early, that is all. Days out, a week perhaps, these things are never exact. Inside the darkened chamber the Queen has heard the bells too. Sound carries up a river. You're in the room when Mistress Clarencius tells her, in the fewest possible words, what the bells were for. And you watch the Queen of England receive the news that her capital has just celebrated, with fire and singing, the birth of a child that her own body has not produced, and you watch her decide in front of you, second by second, what to make of it. Her hand goes flat against her belly, her chin comes up, and she says, in that enormous voice pitched for the room, for the women, for herself, that it is a sign of the people's love, and that God will shortly give them cause to ring again in earnest. The women murmur agreement. The rockers rock the empty cradle. That is the 30th of April, 1555. Hold the date. Because from this day, the palace enters the strangest, cruelest season her servants would ever be asked to describe. The season that, more than the fires, more than the marriage, made the women who knew her speak of her ever afterward in the tone people use for the drowned. Everyone in England is waiting for one cry from one room. And the room stays silent, day upon day upon day. May comes in green along the river, and the reckoning passes, and nothing happens. The physicians had said the end of April. Then they consulted their charts again, and said the first week of May. Then a learned man was brought in who recalculated the whole matter from the quickening, and said the end of May, or perhaps the first days of June, these things being never exact, and every new date is spoken in the same soothing voice, and every new date is believed, because the alternative is not a thought anyone in that palace is willing to hold in daylight. And I need you to understand what waiting means in a royal household in 1555, because it is not what waiting means anywhere else on earth. A farm wife near her time goes on churning and scolding and feeding hens until the pains come. A queen near her time is the fixed centre of a machine that cannot move without her. The midwives are lodged and salaried and cannot leave. The rockers are appointed and cannot leave. The wet nurses chosen for the excellence of their milk are kept waiting week upon week, and their own babies at home are growing, and still they cannot leave. The council does business in antechambers in lowered voices. Ambassadors hold their couriers. Half the government of Europe has a horse saddled, waiting on one woman's body, and the body does not oblige. Your work goes on because linen does not care. You fetch, you carry, you air the close dark rooms as much as the hangings allow, which is hardly at all. The chamber smells of candle smoke and juniper burned against bad airs, of rose water, of the sweet herbs strewn fresh every morning over the rush matin, and under all of it, week by week, the smell of a shut room in a warming season, which no herb on earth can argue away. The tapestries drink the candlelight. The Queen's world has shrunk to 40 feet of shadow by the physician's own orders, at exactly the moment when the whole world is staring at her. She bears it at first, with a patience that surprises you. She sews. That's the thing nobody puts in the histories, and her women never forgot. Through May, through the long candle-lit afternoons, the Queen of England sits sewing for the child. Small things, caps, bands. Her eyes being what they are, she works with the linen almost against her nose, and her stitches are fine, and Mistress Clarencius, who taught her needlework tricks long ago in a happier household, sits by her and says nothing at all for hours, and the two needles go in and out, and the rockers by the empty cradle push it now and then, as if keeping it in practice. Oak on rush matting, the slow oar stroke, and that is the sound of May. 2 needles and an oar. You kneel in the corner of that room with your mending, and some evenings, I will be honest with you, it is almost peaceful. It is almost sweet. A queen and her women, sewing, waiting. The little fool Jane asleep against a chest with her shaved head shining like an egg in the candlelight. If you did not know the date, you could believe you were inside a blessing, but you know the date. Everyone in England knows the date, and the date keeps moving. In the city, they are less patient. Word crawls down the river and back up again, and none of it improves in the journey. Marjorie hears it from the boatmen and brings it to the pallet at night the way a cat brings in things from outside. They are saying the reckoning was cast wrong from the start. They are saying the Queen is sick, not with child at all. They are saying in the alehouses where the talk runs cheapest that some other woman's babe will be smuggled into the chamber, a tradesman's boy scrubbed pink, and the ambassadors write even this home in cipher, because ambassadors are paid to write down what men say in alehouses. They can hang half London, Marjorie whispers, staring at the rafters, and the other half will still talk. She is right. And the talk does something in you that you do not expect. It makes you angry. You who have held the basin, who have folded the cloths, who have seen the body they're also knowing about, you find you cannot bear the knowingness, the ease of it. Men who have never stood within a mile of her laying confident hands on the one hope of a woman whose face you washed this morning. It is the first time in your service that you understand you have taken a side, not in religion, not in policy, nothing so grand. You have taken the side of the body. Mistress Clarencius could have told you it would happen. It is what serving does to people. It is the whole reason great folk keep servants close and enemies far, and the reason, 500 years on, when everyone else's account of this reign has been shouted hoarse, it is the servant's account this story trusts. June comes in hot, and in June you glimpse, twice, the other piece on the board. In the last days of April, while the false spells were still being lived down, the Lady Elizabeth had been brought from her keeping at Woodstock to Hampton Court itself, and there she waits too. The other daughter, the Wrong Faith's daughter, 21 years old, lodged with her small household across the courts, seen by almost no one. You see her twice all summer, once at a window, once in the garden at a distance, walking fast between attendants the way people walk, when walking is the only liberty they have, and even at 100 paces, even with your plain eyes, you can see she is her father's daughter, in the one way that matters at court. She makes the space around her arrange itself. The household is forbidden to gossip about her, which tells you how much gossip there is. What you know is what everyone knows. If the child in the Queen's belly lives, that young woman across the court is nothing forever, a spinster cousin of the crown to be married abroad and forgotten. If the child does not live, she is tomorrow. Every day the birth does not come. The balance in the courtyard shifts a grain. Nobody says it. Everybody carries it. The two sisters, the shut dark room and the fast-walking garden, are the two pans of a scale that all England is standing on, and the beam is one woman's womb. The Queen asks for her once that summer. They meet in private, and what passed between them is not yours to know, and history's only in scraps. What is yours to know is the evening after, because you are on duty at the door, and the Queen comes back into the candlelight with her face held very carefully, the way you carry a bowl too full, and she says nothing about it at all, and she prays that night a long time, and the name in the praying, the one name you catch through the wall, is not her sister's, it is her mother's. Midsummer passes, the hawthorn goes over, the date moves again, and now the machine begins very quietly to grind. You feel it first in the tempers of the middling people, the ushers, the grooms, the midwives themselves, snappish now behind their soothing, because their reputations are staked in that room too. One of the rockers weeps in the passage and says she wants to go home to her own children, and is sharply hushed. The wet nurse's husbands send letters. Down in the city the processions go on, parish by parish, praying for the Queen's happy hour, and the London diarist writes them down. Procession after procession all summer, patient as a mason, and if you read his chronicle today you can watch the entries change from expectation to duty, the way you can watch weather change in the shape of clouds. Inside the darkened chamber, the woman at the centre of the machine is coming apart with a slowness that is the cruelest thing you have ever watched. An ambassador in London that summer, and this is in the dispatches, sober diplomatic ink, reported to his masters that the Queen would sit for hours together on cushions on the floor, low down, her knees drawn up toward her face, silent, unmoving. A woman folding herself around an absence. When I first read that dispatch, I had to put it down and walk about the room, and I am a voice on a recording 5 centuries away. You do not have the luxury of walking about the room. You are 17, and you come in with fresh strewing herbs one afternoon in high July, and there she is, down on the cushions in the tapestry dark, knees up, arms wrapped, the Queen of England sitting the way beggar children sit in doorways in winter, and her eyes are open, and the worst of it, the detail you will never manage to forget, is that she is perfectly quiet. This is the woman of the enormous voice, and the room is so silent you can hear the rush matting tick as it dries. Mistress Clarencius kneels beside her, on the floor, her old knees cracking like green wood, and simply stays there, not touching, not speaking. An hour. You stand against the wall with your herbs going limp in your apron, learning the last and highest degree of your trade, which is this, that there are sorrows where every possible word is a wound, and the whole art of service shrinks to one instruction. Remain. Quiet hands, quiet face. Remain. The swelling, the women whisper in the passage, is less. Nobody says it above a whisper, and nobody says it at all where Mistress Clarencius can hear, not because she would punish it, but because saying it in front of her would make it true. The physicians come and go with their faces professionally arranged. The learned recalculating man is not sent for again, and one morning at the end of July you're carrying out the night's candle ends, and one of the midwives, the eldest, a broad grey Kentish woman who has caught more babies than the parish font has christened, is standing in the outer passage looking out at the river, and she is crying. Not dramatically, just leaking steadily, like a wall in wet weather, wiping it away with the flat of her hand, looking out at the barges. She sees you see her. You'll say nothing, she says. It is not a threat. It is a request, from a tired old woman to a girl with a basket of burnt wicks. Nothing, mistress, you say. She looks back at the water, and then she gives you the only honest reckoning anyone will ever speak aloud of that summer. 6 words, in a flat Kent voice you will hear in your head for the rest of your life. There was never no child, girl. You say nothing. You go down the back stair with your basket, and you stand in the servery passage in the smell of tallow and river mud, and you find your own face is wet, and you could not say for certain who you are crying for. For her, folded on her cushions around a hope that is dissolving grain by grain. For the pink caps sewn by candlelight, so small, folded away in their chest. For the country that rang its bells too soon. For the rocker's rocking emptiness in an airless room while the summer burns by outside. There is a kind of grief that has no body to bury, and it is not the lesser kind. It is the worse kind because it cannot be buried, and no one will stand beside you at its grave, and the church has no office for it. The whole palace has caught it now. It moves down corridors like damp, and still, and this is the part that breaks her women, still she hopes, because what is her choice? To stop hoping is to stand in the wreckage of everything at once. The marriage, the succession, the sign of God's pardon, the answer to 1536, all of it down in one fall. So the mind does what minds do at the edge of the pit. It bargains. The reckonings were mistaken, that is all. Women have gone 11 months, the old books say so. God is trying her faith as he tried the mothers in Scripture, and Scripture is combed for late-granted children, and there are just enough of them in it to keep the candle lit. She uses the very names. You hear her through the wall in the small hours, reminding God of Sarah, who laughed at the promise and was given her son anyway. Reminding God of Hannah, who wept in the temple and was thought drunk, 4 hours at a time, on stone, on bad knees, in the 5th month of a lying-in for a child that was never there. The Queen of England recites to the darkness the entire short history of miraculous mercy, like a lawyer citing precedent to a judge who has stopped answering. You're asleep against Marjorie's back when she finally rings those nights. The little silver bell, very late, very soft once. It means water, or the cloth for her head, or the shutter eased, or nothing. It means a human creature in the room. You go in with the rushlight. You never once find her asleep. August comes, and in the first days of August, without any announcement, without any word from physician or counsel or queen, the thing ends in the only way left to it, which is silently, sideways, in the language of furniture. The order comes down. The court removes to Oatlands. That is all. 3 words of household routine. Oatlands is a small hunting house a few miles up the river, far too small for a lying-in, far too small for most of the establishment, which is exactly the point, because a remove to Oatlands means the great household disperses, and the midwives go home, and the rockers are paid off, and the wet nurses are released to their own hungry babies, and the darkened chamber is opened and aired and stripped, and no herald anywhere reads anything aloud. There is no proclamation that there is no child. There is no sentence spoken in public from that day to this. The pregnancy of Queen Mary is never officially ended. It is simply never mentioned again, and the greatest hope of the realm is dismantled by porters in aprons, in an August morning's work, like a stage after a play. You help do it. That is a thing you carry ever after, that of all the hands, yours were among them. You take down the heavy hangings that made the holy dark and the windows stand bare, and the summer light comes into that room like something rude, showing the wax spots, the scuffed matting, the ordinary tiredness of a room that has been lived in too hard, and the room is just a room. You fold the linen that was never used, bale after white bale, back into its presses, and the folded weight of it in your arms is the exact weight of the thing nobody is saying. You pack the small sewn caps into their chest yourself, because you would rather it were you than someone who might handle them wrongly, and you lay lavender between them, and you do not cry doing it, and you are oddly proud of that, and Mistress Clarencius passes behind you while you work, and rests her hand once on your shoulder, 2 seconds, the only time in 4 years she touches you. And the cradle. The cradle goes down to a storeroom by the water gate, carried by 2 porters who have been told nothing except mind the door frames. You walk behind it with its coverlets in your arms because that is your errand, and so you are witness. They set it down among crated hangings, and one of the porters, a young one, reads out the carved rhyme slowly, lips moving. The child which thou to Mary, O Lord of might, hast send, and then stops, because he has understood it, and looks at his mate, and his mate looks at him, and neither says one word. They go out, the door is locked, and the finest cradle in England is left rocking very slightly in the dark over its own shadow. A soft push, once, twice, slower, still. I told you, when we first uncrated it in the gallery, that this was the object history has never been able to look at steadily. Now you know why. Now you're one of the people who cannot. The letters, the pre-signed letters with the blank where the date should go, you see once more and never again. A secretary carries them through the gallery in a locked travelling coffer, and pauses to shift his grip, and that is all. A man resting a box on his knee for a moment, and inside the box is a stack of announcements of the happiest event of the age, signed by a queen, addressed to half of Europe, waiting for a fact that never arrived. Nobody burns them. That is the detail that tells you everything about how this ending was managed, which is to say, it was not managed, it was only survived. Burning them would have been a decision, and a decision would have been an admission, and no one in that court, from the Queen to the boy who turned the spits, was capable of the admission. So the letters were simply kept and filed and forgotten, and some of them are lying in the archives at this hour, blanks and all, while you and I are talking, and the scholars who handle them still lower their voices. And the Queen came out of her chamber, and was dressed, and went to Oatlands with her household, upright in the sight of people, and said nothing, and was said nothing too. If you want a definition of royalty that is not about crowns, I will give you the one her servants learned that August. Royalty is having no privacy for your hope and no funeral for it either. She was 39. She had been, for 9 months, the most watched woman in the world, and the world, having watched, looked away, and began to talk about her sister. What was left to her that August was the husband, and the husband was already leaving. Be fair to him for a moment, because her women, who had every reason to hate him, were never quite able to. Philip had done what he was sent to do. He had married where his father pointed. He had been courteous to a wife 11 years his senior whom he had not chosen. He had kept his bored gentleman on a leash for a year in a country that openly loathed them, and he had waited out the lying in to its unspeakable end, standing beside her dignity while all Europe smirked behind its hand. Now his father's wars were calling. The emperor was old and sick and handing over his crowns, and there was, this is the plain arithmetic of it, no longer any child to wait for. In the last days of August, the court moves down the river to Greenwich, and on the 29th he takes his leave. She goes with him as far as the top of the stairs, in front of everyone, and she does it well. That is the public scene, and the public scene is flawless. The Queen composed, the King attentive, the bows, the barge, the oars. A state parting, nothing more. He's to be gone a few weeks. Everyone says a few weeks. Everyone knows better. The private scene is in a dispatch. The Venetian ambassador, Michiel, a careful man who liked her more than his job required him to, wrote home what happened when the public scene was over. And because he wrote it, I can give it to you as documented truth, and not as a scene I have painted for your feelings. She went back through the gallery to a window that looked on the river. She believed herself unobserved, he says, and she sat at that window and followed the barge with her eyes, and she wept, openly, steadily, where she thought no one could see. The sight of it, he told the Doge and Senate, being enough to move anyone who saw it. She was not unobserved. Queens never are. That is the whole sorrow of this story in one sentence. You are in that gallery, far down, flat against the wainscot with a folded cloak over your arms, and between the mullions the river is bright as hammered pewter, and the barge on it grows smaller and smaller, and the oars flash and stop flashing, and are gone behind the bend at the Isle of Dogs. And still she sits. The gallery empties itself around her tactfully, person by person, the way a room empties around grief, and Mistress Clarencius stands a little behind her chair and looks at nothing, and the light moves slowly across the floorboards, and somewhere below a boatman is whistling, and the Queen of England watches an empty river until the tide itself has turned. 19 months. That first absence lasts, not a few weeks, and I will tell you how her women measured it, because they did not measure it in months. They measured it in candles and in ink. She wrote to him constantly. That winter you learn the shape of it. The supper cleared, the cards declined, and the Queen at her writing table with her face a hand's breadth from the paper, writing to Philip in the French they shared, sheet after sheet in her own strong angular hand, and the candle burning down, and the sand shaken, and the packet sealed as if a seal could hold a marriage shut. The couriers go out in all weathers. What comes back slower, shorter, cooler, dictated half the time, and she reads even those thin answers the way you have seen hungry men eat. Once that autumn, a packet comes in from the Low Countries, and it is thick, and she takes it away to read alone, and is bright at cards all that evening, bright with her women, teasing Jane the Fool until Jane pretends to sulk, and pays her losses laughing, and you catch Mistress Clarencius and Mistress Strelly not looking at each other so carefully that it is louder than a shout. A thick letter did that. 6 sheets of secretary's French. That is the size of the mercy being rationed to her now. And the old guest moves back in. The autumn sickness, the headaches, the racing heart at 2 a.m, the melancholy sitting on her chest like water, all of it worse now than the women have ever known it. And small wonder. The physicians bleed her. You hold the basin. You've held it before, but this winter is the first time you notice your own hands have stopped shaking when you do, and you're not sure whether that is skill or something being worn away in you. I want to give you one evening from that first widowed winter, because 'tis the evening you finally understand the woman you serve, and you will need the understanding for what is coming. It is a night in December 1555. Sleet on the windows at St. James's, and she cannot sleep, and the bell rings, once, soft. You go in with the light. She's sitting up against the pillows with her hair in its plait, small in the great bed, and she does not want water, or the cloth, or the shutter. She wants, it turns out, to talk, and there is no one awake to talk to except a chamberer of 18 holding a rushlight, and so, for the only time in your 4 years, she talks to you. She asks about Rochester. She asks about your father's boatyard, what timber he favours, how many men he keeps, whether the new cathedral clergy pay their bills. She asks about your mother's health, by name, remember, always by name, and whether the damp lies bad along the Medway in winter. Ordinary questions, one after another, unhurried, in that deep voice gone quiet and rusty with the hour, and you stand there answering in whispers with the light trembling shadows up the bed curtains, and it takes you a long time, too long, you will think later, to understand what is happening. She does not care about timber, she is homesick, not for a place. Queens have no places. She is homesick for the sort of life where a husband is in the bed, and the children are down the passage, and the accounts are small and the doors are thin, the life every woman she was ever kind to at the gate simply has, the life that every law of God and England says is the point of a woman, and that she, the queen of it all, has been refused with a completeness that no beggar at her gate would trade for. She falls asleep mid-question, between one word and the next, the way exhausted children do. You stand a moment with the light. 39 years old, the most feared name in Europe, a plait like your mother's, going grey, on a pillow the size of Kent. You shade the rush and go out and lie down beside Marjorie and stare at the dark. And Marjorie, who you thought was asleep, says quietly, "Now you know," and does not say what, and does not need to. The year that follows, 1556, is the grey year, and I'm going to walk you through it quickly, the way the household lived it, head down, season by season, because that is the truthful pace of it. No thunderclap, just weather of both kinds. The fires go on. That is the season's dark understory, and I will not pretend it away. In March, word comes up from Oxford that the old Archbishop Cranmer, her father's archbishop, the man whose court unmade her mother's marriage, has gone to the stake and the manner of it. The recantation signed and then cast off at the end, the hand held first into the flame, is in every mouth in London within the week, and in none inside the privy lodgings. The talk in the household hall stops when you enter, the way it always stops. The east wind that spring carries what the east wind carries. You've learned the household's discipline by now. Learn to hold both truths without letting either one show on your face. The woman who prays through the wall and the smoke over the city. I told you at Smithfield that they come from the same place, the prayers and the fires. And 1556 is the year you stop hoping that one of them will consume the other, and understand that they will simply burn side by side to the end. And side by side with all of it, the kindnesses go on, small and particular and unglamorous as ever, and this too is in the accounts, and I will keep reporting it because her women kept seeing it. The gate arms, the burned-out tenant of a manor she's never seen, relieved by warrant. A guardsman's daughter christened that spring with the Queen for godmother. One more name in that long ledger of other people's children, and the christening gift entered by the clerk in the same brown ink as everything else. Jane the Fool is ill in the summer, some fever, and is physicked and nursed at the Queen's charge like a kinswoman, the apothecary's bill going through the ordinary books, and when Jane is well enough to be silly again, the Queen keeps her by her the whole evening and laughs, really laughs twice, and the sound goes down the passage like something escaping. That summer at Hampton Court again, you climb one afternoon to the leads, the flat walkways up among the chimneys, sent up with two other maids to beat and air the summer hangings where the wind can carry off the dust. It is the only time in your service you stand above your own life and look at it, and I want you to stand there a moment with the beating rod in your hands, because from the leads you can see the whole machine at once, the courts below, ringed inside ringed, gawkers to guards to that one shuttered range of windows, hers, the gardens, the knots and the clipped rosemary, where a small figure in black is walking her slow daily walk between two women, taking the physician's prescribed air, pausing at the sundial, the river beyond, brown and patient, sliding its barges toward London, which is a smudge of smoke on the eastern sky, 30,000 chimneys feeding one cloud. Kent somewhere south under the haze, your mother in it. The wind up here is clean, the first entirely clean air you have breathed in 2 years, and it smells of hot lead and grass and the far-off river, and you can hear, thinned by height into something almost gentle, the whole song of the place at once: hammers, geese, a boatman, a bell. From up here the palace looks like what it claims to be, the ordered centre of an ordered realm. You know now what it looks like from 6 feet. You will spend the rest of your life being the only sort of person who has seen both, a servant, and this hour on the leads is as close as your story comes to what the great call perspective. Take a breath of it, then pick up the rod, because the hangings will not beat themselves, and the dust flies west in a long gold banner over the chimneys of the king's side, where there is no king. Autumn, winter. Her health bends and does not break. The card table, the virginals on her better evenings, the letters going out to her husband who has become a correspondence. Christmas at court is thinner than the great Christmas of 2 years ago, and nobody says so. Marjorie is made senior over the linen, which means you now share your pallet with her authority as well as her elbows, and a new chamberer comes in under you both. A Sussex clothier's daughter, 15, who cries the first week the way you did not let yourself, and you find yourself, without ever deciding to, teaching her the catechism in the same words it was taught to you. Early, clean, silent. Serve the body, not the crown. Quiet hands, quiet face. She looks at you the way you looked at Marjorie, as if you had been born knowing it. 2 years it has taken to turn you into furniture that teaches. And then, in the spring of 1557, the oars flash on the river again, and it is not a courier's boat. He comes back. March, and Philip is in England, and the palace turns itself inside out with a joy that is 4 parts hope and 6 parts nerves. She is at the stairs to meet him. She wears, and you know because you dressed her, the great table diamond, his father's betrothal stone, which has lain in its velvet box through every month of the absence, because she could not bear it on her, and could not bear it given away either. It goes on at her breast that morning like something relit. She's 41, and on the water stairs in the March wind, waiting for the barge, she's briefly, visibly, terribly young. Her women watch that spring the way sailors watch a glass falling. Because they know, everyone past 16 in that household knows what he has come back for. Not for her, for the war. Spain is at war with France, and he needs England in it. England's ships and England's money and England's harbours, and the council resists him week after week, and he works on the one councillor who cannot refuse him long, who loves him, and by June it is done. Heralds on the streets, England at war with France, the old enemy in Spain's quarrel. The city takes it sourly. The treasury takes it worse, and her women take it in the only currency this story deals in, the body. She is happy that spring, actually happy, headaches and all, for the whole 100 and some days of it, and every day of the happiness is buying something that will be paid for later, and she is the only person at court who does not seem to know it. The first week of July at Dover, he takes ship. She travels down with him to the coast to see him aboard, keeps the flawless public face, comes back to Whitehall through the summer dust. He will never set foot in England again. She will never see his face again. Nobody in this story knows that yet, and I am only telling you because you, listener, are the one person here who is allowed to rest, and the truth, at this hour of the night, is more restful than hope. Her women had no such mercy. They had only the falling glass. The bill for the war comes in with the new year, and it comes addressed, as such bills always are, to the one person who wanted the war least and allowed it anyway. In the first days of January 1558, in a winter so hard the birds drop frozen from the eaves, a French army does what no French army has managed in 200 years. It takes Calais, the last English town on the soil of France, the last stone of her great-grandfather's empire, the port every English schoolboy and every English merchant thinks of as simply England across the water, gone, in a week, in the frost, while the fleet that should have relieved it is pinned in harbour by the weather. I need you to understand what Calais is to these people, because no map can tell you. It is not a strategic asset. It is a tooth in the head of the nation. Every woolsack that made London rich passed through it. Its loss is the kind of news that makes grown merchants stand still in the street with their mouths working, and it lands on the Queen in the account of everyone near her. Like a private bereavement made public property, one more thing loved and lost, this time with the whole country watching and the whole country, for once, entitled to its anger. There is a sentence everyone knows, that when she was dead and opened, Calais would be found written on her heart. She never said it where any servant of that winter could hear. It surfaces years afterward, in a chronicle printed when she was safely a story, and I give it to you as exactly that. A later legend, because this channel keeps the border marked. But I will tell you what her women could and did attest, that from January she carried the loss visibly in the flesh, the way some people carry a death, and that the old guest, the winter sickness, came in on the heels of the news and this time did not go away with the spring. And here I have to stop and lower my voice and tell you the other thing about that January, the thing her household had known since the autumn and had been holding the way you hold something too hot to set down. She believed she was with child again, from the summer, from the visit. And this time, and if your chest tightens a little here, let it, this time she told almost no one. The woman who 3 years before had let all Europe set its clocks by her body, who had processions praying for her in every parish in London, that woman waited. Month upon month, in silence, telling only her closest, watching her own hope like a prisoner she did not trust, until more than half the term was gone, because she remembered. She remembered the bells rung for nothing. She remembered the letters with the blank where a fact should be. When word was at last sent to Philip in the winter, it was sent quietly, and the announcement to the world was made softly, without Te Deum, and the due time was reckoned for March. Inside the privy lodgings, her women received the news with faces you can imagine by now because you have stood where they stand, joy on the face. On the inside, arithmetic no one speaks aloud. She is 42 next month. The physician's eyes slide sideways when the matter is raised. And this time, mark this, for it is the most eloquent silence in the whole reign. No cradle is sent for, no carver is commissioned, no rhyme composed, no nursery fitted, no rockers appointed. The first cradle is still standing where the porters left it, in the dark by a locked door, and nobody in the length and breadth of the household so much as says the word. The letters were kept because no one could bear a decision. The cradle stays locked away for the same reason, and the two facts together are the truest history of that winter ever written. And neither one is a sentence. March comes, the reckoned time. You have lived this month before, and so has she, and the household moves through it like people crossing ice, weight always on the back foot. And on the 30th of March in Passion Week, she does the bravest quiet thing you ever see her do. She makes her will. She's a lawyer's granddaughter twice over, and she writes it carefully, and the reason on the first page in the formal phrases, is the one custom demands and truth endorses, foreseeing the great danger which by God's ordinance remain to all women in their travail of children, thinking myself to be with child, 600 years of royal paper, and I know few lines harder to read aloud at night than that lawyer's phrase doing its double work. Hope and doubt in one clause. A woman providing for a birth she no longer quite believes in and cannot afford to disbelieve in. The will leaves her soul to God and the crown to the child. And down the parchment, among the bequests, the clerk's list, and on the list, exactly where I promised you it would be, the stone. To my said most dear and entirely beloved husband, the jewel his father the emperor sent to her at the betrothal, the great table diamond you have carried in its velvet box, heavy in a way that has nothing to do with weight. She is giving it back, item by item, calmly on vellum. The whole freight of that marriage is being folded and returned with love like a borrowed cloak, and if you want to know what her women thought as the will was witnessed, they thought what you are thinking now, and like you they said none of it. April passes, May passes. There is no child. There was never any child. The physicians at last say among themselves, and the ambassadors write home, what the eldest midwife told a girl with a basket of candle ends 3 years ago by a summer window. This time there are no false bells, no bonfires, no city made a fool of. The country is too tired, and she is too tired, and the hope simply goes out the way a lamp goes out in the morning, unremarked, because a greater light was already coming up behind it, and the greater light this time is her own death. Though the household is still calling it the old guest of the dropsy, the autumn fever come early. From the summer of 1558, the story of the rain and the story of the sick room become the same story. She keeps state as long as anyone dares let her. Papers still come to the writing table, and she still reads them at a hand's breadth with the frown of effort strangers used to take for fury. But the swellings and the fevers gain week by week, and there is a new thing, a drowsiness that takes her mid-sentence sometimes, mid-prayer, and frightens her more than pain ever has, because pain she has known all her life, and this is not pain. This is the body beginning to close its accounts, and through that summer, all over England, the fever is general. A great influenza is walking the country, the worst sickness in living memory, emptying pews and workshops, carrying off thousands upon thousands, so that the realm itself seems to lie in the next bed, sweating with its queen. In August she's moved to St. James's, the smaller palace, red brick among its own trees, quieter than Whitehall, easier to warm. You know its passages by now as well as you know your needle case. The household contracts around her like a hand closing gently. Fewer strangers, fewer papers. The presence chamber grows dusty quiet, and the real court, the only court that ever mattered in this story, is once again what it was on your first morning. A bedchamber, a handful of women, a basin, a bell. Jane Dormer is there, 20 years old now, betrothed that year to a great Spaniard, the Count of Feria, Philip's own friend and envoy. A love match improbably sprouted in the middle of all this politics. And the Queen, who arranged nothing about it but blessed all of it, keeps the girl near her constantly, as if warmth could be borrowed across the coverlet. It is Jane who reads to her now. Mistress Strelly keeps the day watches. Mistress Clarencius keeps the nights, as she has kept them these 20 years and more, and has begun, you notice, to look her age at last, as if she had been holding her own years at bay on the Queen's behalf, and could no longer spare the strength, Marjorie manages the linen with a tyranny that you understand perfectly, because clean linen is the one victory left within the household's power, and by God the household will have it. And you, 21 now, 4 years a chamberer, steady-handed, quiet-faced, find that the sick room has redistributed all ranks. At 3 in the morning there is no keeper of robes and no clothier's daughter. There are only the woman in the bed and whoever is awake to serve her body. You are often the one awake. One evening in October, quite late, she asks for the virginals, not to hear them, to play. The instrument is carried in and set on its table by the bed, the candles brought near, and she sits up against the pillows and puts her swollen hands to the keys, leaning close to see, and plays. I told you, a long time ago, on a night when she played alone in the half-dark and you forgot to move, that the virginals would come back at the end, and that I would rather you were not ready. Here it is, and you are not, and neither am I. The hands that Europe applauded when they were 10 years old find perhaps half the notes now. The pavan comes out slow, broken, patched with silence where the fingers fail, and she does not stop. She goes on to the end of the strain at her own pace, absorbed, exact where she can be, forgiving herself nothing, the way she has done everything in her whole life, and the women stand around the bed in the candlelight not daring to breathe, and the little rain of notes, thin and imperfect and brave past all bearing, falls through the room and stops. She sits a moment with her hands on the silent keys. Then she says, in the enormous voice gone soft as ash, that it wants tuning, and Mistress Clarencius says steadily that the man shall be sent for and the instrument is carried out, and no one in that room ever hears her play again. She dreams in those last weeks, and tells her dreams, and this is not my invention. It is set down in the memoir made from Jane Dormer's memories, from the mouths of the women who were in the room. She told them what good dreams she had, that she saw many little children, like angels, playing before her, singing pleasing notes. Little children playing, where she could watch them. The women who heard it wrote it down without one word of comment, and I have none to add either, except this. Whatever accountancy heaven keeps, it owed her that dream. And for once, at the very end, something owed her was actually paid. In October she adds a codicil to the will, and the codicil is the sound of the last door being closed softly. The phrases about her travail are gone. She writes now that God has not yet been pleased to send her fruit of her body, and that the crown must therefore pass to the next heir by the laws of the realm. She does not write her sister's name. She never once in any paper that survives writes her sister's name as heir. But in the first week of November she says the thing plainly enough to the men from the council, kneeling at her bedside, and they ride for Hatfield the same day, where a red-haired young woman of 25 is waiting under the oaks with her whole life about to arrive, and from that hour the road north from London is busy in one direction only. Courtiers, place-seekers, ambassadors' men, the whole migrating flock of favour, streaming away from the dying sun toward the rising one, exactly as the dying sun, who watched her own father's courtiers all her childhood, must have known they would. At St. James's it goes quiet. You'll be told all your life after that the quiet was desolation, and some of it was. But her women, keeping those last night watches, knew a stranger truth, and it is the last secret this story has to give you, so hold it gently. The quiet was also peace, the terrible engine of hope, which had driven that body through phantom cradles and pre-signed letters and 4-hour prayers, through fires lit for love of God and a husband loved past sense, and a Calais lost like a limb. The engine that had never once in 42 years let her rest was finally, mercifully running down. She made her peace in form, confessed, received her God, comforted her weeping women. In the old accounts it is she who comforts them, telling them what good dreams she had. The bell on the table rings less and less, and when it rings it asks for less and less. Water. The cloth. The shutter eased. Human creature in the room. You go in with a rushlight those November nights, and stand where 4 years of nights have taught you to stand, and sometimes she knows you. The little Kentish one. Kent breeds honest losers, and sometimes she is elsewhere, speaking softly in Spanish, in Latin. Once at length to her mother, and you hold the water and keep the light steady and let her be wherever she is, because you learned long ago from a woman kneeling on a cold floor that there are hours when every possible word is a wound, and the whole art shrinks to one instruction. Remain. There is one more scene from those weeks that her women kept, and passed hand to hand down the years until it reached paper, and I have saved it for here because it belongs to Mistress Strelly, and I told you at the beginning to watch Strelly, the one who doesn't flatter, and to trust that you would learn what her plainness was worth. The story, as the household told it afterward, and as it was set down long after in the memoir made from Jane Dormer's memories, so take it as their testimony, and not as a clerk's record, is this. In the days when the last hope of a child was going out, when the smooth voices round the bed were still finding smooth things to say, the Queen turned to Friedersweed Strelly, who had never once told her what she longed to hear, and said words to this effect, and the household repeated them ever after like a verse. Ah, Strelly, Strelly, I see they be all flatterers, and none true to me but thou. 20 years of court distilled. The kneelers, the smilers, the men with the saddled horses, all of it weighed at the end against one dry gentlewoman who paused half a second before every answer to check it against the truth. When people ask what servants are for, and great houses have always secretly asked it, there is the answer from a queen's own mouth, on her deathbed. Somebody in the room who is real. The end comes in the dark hours of the 17th of November, 1558, and it comes the way her women would tell it for the rest of their lives, quietly, at Mass. She'd asked for the Mass at the usual early hour, and it was said at daybreak in her chamber. The little altar, the candles standing up straight in the stillness, the way candles do just before winter dawn, when no door in the house has been opened yet. She was past rising. But her women, who were all around the bed, every one of them, nobody had gone to sleep, heard her follow the service, and this is their account. Preserved through Jane Dormer's household, she answered. The responses, in Latin, in a thread of that enormous voice, plainly, in her right mind to the end of the office, and somewhere in it, or just after it, between one moment and the next, with no struggle that any of them could see, she went. The women nearest thought she had fallen asleep. That is the phrase they used, and kept using all their lives, and I will not improve on it. They thought she was asleep. 42 years old. Queen of England 5 years and 4 months. The most hated name her country would ever produce, and she died with the words of the Mass in her mouth, surrounded by every single person in the world who actually knew her, and not one of them, in all the years and all the tellings after, in exile, in old age, in another country, ever described that morning as anything but gentle. The little silver bell on the table by the bed does not ring again. It goes into the inventories with everything else. Somewhere in the lists it is an entry, a weight in ounces, a valuation. To you it stays what it was. 4 years of small hours, a queen's last claims on human company, water, the cloth, the shutter, a creature in the room. No object in the palace weighs less. No object in this story weighs more. And now the day does the thing that you will never quite forgive it for, though you will understand it perfectly. It goes on. By mid-morning the councillors met, and before dinner the heralds are out, and the proclamation is read at Westminster and in Cheapside. The Queen is dead, God save Queen Elizabeth. And London, which has buried a fifth of itself in a year of fever, which is cold and poor and at war and heartily sick of smoke in the east wind, London goes up like a hayrick again. The bells begin, parish upon parish, the same bells, some of the very same ropes and the very same hands that rang for the Phantom Prince 3 years ago. And by night there are bonfires in the streets and tables set out with drinking, and the sound rolls up the river to St. James's, and comes in at the shuttered windows of a chamber where women are washing a body by candlelight. That is not a detail I would dare invent. The diarist wrote the rejoicing down, bells and fires and feasting at the change of reigns, the same patient chronicler who wrote down the false joy of 1555, and if his ink knew any difference between the two ringings, he does not record it. You're inside with the basin and the rosemary water and the fair linen, doing for her the last things, the things her mother's women once did for her mother in a cold house she was forbidden to visit, and the bells are shaking the dark outside, and Marjorie is working across from you with tears sliding down a perfectly steady face, and nobody says one word about the sound. Quiet hands, quiet face. The house of your service is finishing the only way it ever could, with the body tended and the crown already ridden north, and now you know everything Mistress Clarencius's 4 sentences were ever trying to teach you. We serve the body, not the crown. The crown has servants enough. It had new ones by nightfall, and here the story pauses on its own threshold, because the same day has one more death in it, and the age itself seems to have arranged the timing. Across the river at Lambeth, Cardinal Pole, her kinsman, her archbishop, the man whose homecoming greeting made the child leap that November evening 4 years ago, has lain sick with the same fever all autumn. He is told in his own sickbed that the Queen is gone. Those around him wrote that he took it as men take a summons. He died that same evening, hours behind her, the last Roman Archbishop of Canterbury, following the last Roman Queen of England out of the world in a single November day, and with the two of them, though not one person ringing the bells could know it yet, went the whole world this story has lived in, the Latin through the wall, the 4-hour prayers, the realm reconciled on its knees in a weeping chamber. 1 day, 2 deaths, the end of an England. You do not yet know, none of you standing at that graveside winter knows, that the red-haired young woman riding south from Hatfield will reign for 44 years, that she will unmake in her first 12 months everything your queen died believing she had restored, and that between the 2 sisters, the one who reigned 5 years and the one who reigned 44, history will hold precisely one long conversation and give all its speaking parts to the survivor. The funeral is in December, and it is magnificent, and you walk in it. 3 days of rites, the coffin borne from St. James's to Westminster, with the whole machinery of Tudor death turned out in the winter air, the heralds, the banners, the hundreds of mourners in black gowns given by the wardrobe, and chief among the images, riding on the coffin itself, a crowned effigy of her in crimson velvet, lifelike, sceptred, so like her that people cried out along the route, The chronicler Taylor was there too, of course, writing it all down, the tapers and the trappings, and he preserved as well what happened at the very end, when the mass was sung and the coffin lowered into its vault in the abbey. Her household officers came forward one by one, and broke their white staves of office over their heads, and cast the pieces down into the grave after her, which is the old sign that a royal household is dissolved, that the service is ended, that the servants are servants no more. The staves cracking one after another in the incense smoke and the winter light. That sound is the true last line of the reign, and it was made not by bishops or councillors, but by the household, by her people, the ones who knew. The black cloth you wear in that procession you sewed yourself in the crowded fortnight before, the whole wardrobe sewing morning from morning till dark, and you sewed it with your mother's silver thimble, the one that came to court in a wooden box with a change of linen and 11 needles 4 years ago. Your mother served the mother, her thimble sewed mourning for the daughter. There are families whose whole history is written in objects like that, small, silver, warm from a working hand, and none of it in any archive, and I would trade a shelf of chronicles for the contents of that needle case. In the weeks after, the household is wound up, and the wardrobe is inventoried. Every gown, every sleeve, entered and checked against the books by clerks who never knew her, and somewhere in those lists, and the lists survive, the clerk's patient hands, is a pair of sleeves of tawny velvet sewn with seed pearls. All pearls accounted for, nothing wanting, nothing wanting. One pearl on that sleeve sits a half thread tighter than its sisters, with a third pass of silk for a frightened girl's peace of mind and a knot small enough to hide under a fingernail, and no clerk on earth could find it, and you could find it in the dark. That is what a servant's history is. It is the stitch the inventory cannot see. It holds anyway. The women scatter, and where the record follows them, I will follow it, and where it does not, I will not pretend. Jane Dormer marries her Spanish count that December, in the very season of the funeral, and goes with him the next year to Spain, into a great house and a long life, and she never, in more than 50 years of it, stops talking about her queen, and in her old age her household set the memories down, and through that manuscript, as I promised you at the start, half of everything gentle the world knows about Mary Tudor came down to us. She is the one who remembered, and with her to Spain, this is documented, and it is my favourite fact in the whole sad tale, went Susan Clarencius, old now, her decades of service done, who chose, with all England before her, to spend her last years abroad in the house of a girl she'd helped raise, among people who spoke of her dead mistress with love. She never came back. Keeper of the robes to the end, of the robes, and of everything else she kept, which was everything, and which she took with her, unspoken, into a Spanish grave. Fritzweid Strelli's name thins out of the lists and slips from the record, as most true things do. Jane the Fool is paid and clothed, and then the entries simply stop, and history, which wrote down her shoes and her barber, never troubled to write down her end, and the chamberers, the girls of the palettes and the rushlights, the Cicelies and the Marjories, whoever they really were, the wage lists hold their kind for a season longer, and then the tide of paper goes over them, and they return to Kent and to Norfolk, to boat yards and clothiers' shops, carrying what they had seen, and history closed over them without a sound. But it was their testimony, seeping outward for a generation, through Jane Dormer's household and 100 firesides, that kept alive the other Mary, the one behind the door, until scholars came looking for her at last, 4 centuries late, with the account books open on the table. Now, the name. You've been patient, and it is time, and we will do it the way this channel does everything, with dates. No one called her Bloody Mary while she lived. No one called her Bloody Mary the day she died, or the year after, or the decade after. In her own reign she was simply the Queen, and to her enemies in whispers other things, but not that. 5 years after her death, a book was printed in London. The Acts and Monuments of John Fox, the Book of Martyrs, as England came to call it, a vast, passionate, unforgettable record of the burnings, with woodcuts of the fires that went into parish churches across the land, chained open next to the Bible itself, and for 100 years English children learn the rain from those pages, the smoke and the stakes and the martyrs' last words. What Fox built, later and harsher pamphleteers roofed. The actual nickname Bloody Mary belongs to the polemics of later generations, a weapon in quarrels she never lived to see, and it worked. It worked the way few phrases in the language have ever worked, until the woman was gone entirely, and only the adjective remained. The cocktail came in our own age, tomato red in a tall glass, named in a bar with a laugh. The mirror game came with it, children in dark bathrooms daring each other say her name 3 times. 5 centuries of distance, and what survives of Mary Tudor in the common mouth is a drink, a dare, and a body count. The burnings were real. Nothing in this long night has told you otherwise, and the number stands near 300. And the smoke on the east wind was smoke. And no cradle rhyme and no card game and no christening gift outweighs it, and her own servants never pretended it did. They only insisted stubbornly in Spanish parlours and Kentish kitchens on the whole of her, the woman who signed the warrants, and the woman who could not sleep, the Queen of the Fires and the Mary of the 4-hour prayers, both, all the way down. History has spent 500 years choosing one column of the ledger. Her women refused, and tonight, for one night, so have we. She lies in Westminster Abbey, on the north side of the chapel her grandfather built. For nearly 50 years she lay there under plain stones, and then in 1606, by order of a new king from Scotland, a great monument went up over the grave, and her sister Elizabeth, dead by then herself, was laid in the same vault, above her, the 2 of them together at the end, the 2 daughters of King Henry, who between them held one crown for half a century, and could never once safely embrace. On the monument the new king's men set a Latin line, and I will give it to you in English, and then, I promise, I will let you sleep. Partners in throne and grave, here we rest. 2 sisters, Elizabeth and Mary, in hope of one resurrection. Partners in throne and grave. Whoever composed that line buried a whole century's grief in 11 words, and if you stand there today, in the North Aisle, in the stone light, with the tourists shuffling and the choir practicing somewhere out of sight, you can read it for yourself, and underneath your feet, closer together than they ever stood in life, the 2 of them keep at last the only peace that's ever available to their family. Nobody standing there whispers a name 3 times. It is very quiet, and Hampton Court still stands. That is where this story began, and that is where it goes to rest. The palace of the darkened chamber is a palace of open windows now. The courts where the wet nurses waited are lawns and gift shops and school parties, but the brick is the same brick, laid before she was born, and the great hall still holds up its carpentered sky. And in the gatehouse the astronomical clock that struck the hours of her prayers is still there, still turning, Nicholas Orsion's clock, 5 centuries old, still showing the hour, the month, the phases of the moon, and the time of high water at London Bridge, faithfully marking the tides of a river that no Queen's barge will ever ride again. The machine outlived the machine it was built to serve. Clocks do. And somewhere in the fabric of that place, below the state rooms, along the plain brick passages where visitors walk through quickly on their way to somewhere grander, are the spaces where her women lived, the pallets and the rushlights, the stairs their feet wore hollow, and if any part of this story still lives in those walls, it is not in the painted galleries. It is there, in the servants' veins of the house where the truth always lived. So let the palace stand in the dark by its river, and let the clock turn and come away now. The story is over, and the night is not, and the night belongs to you. Centuries will pass. They have passed already. You heard them go by tonight like barges in the dark. The England she knew has changed past recognition. The rushlight has become the lamp on your nightstand. The courier's packets have become the glow in your pocket, and the coffee houses have become whatever you were staring at before you turn this on. But people still sit up in the small hours bargaining with heaven over what they cannot have. People still keep hope executed in advance, signed and sealed, waiting for a fact. People still serve other people, wash them, feed them, sit with them in the dark, and are forgotten by every list that matters, and hold everything together anyway. Some things do not change. The body does not change. The night does not change. And you have been in service a long time tonight. 4 years by the reckoning of this story. You were early. You were clean. You were silent. You kept quiet hands and a quiet face through everything this house could show you, and you served the body, not the crown, and the body has been seen to now, and the watch is ended, and no bell is going to ring again tonight. You have done enough. You have heard enough. You have carried enough. Set it down now, all of it, the basin and the rushlight and the folded cloth. Set down the pearl, sewn fast, accounted for. Set down the diamond, returned with love, safe on its list. Set down the letters that never needed sending, and the small caps in their lavender, and the cradle at rest in its dark room, still at last, its long wait over, its rhyme said. Set down the thimble back in its box. They were only ever things. It was the hands that mattered, and the hands can rest. Your palate is waiting. The straw that seemed so poor on your first frightened night is soft now with the shape of your own years, and Marjorie is warm against your back, breathing slow, and the passage is dark, and the palace is settling around you brick by brick, tick by tick, the way old houses settle talking themselves to sleep. The river slides past the water gate. The watchman's feet go away down the gallery. Somewhere far off, the last bell of the day rings the hour and stops, and the silence after it spreads out like still water. Let it come now. Let sleep take you the way it took a tired chamberer on a straw pallet outside a queen's door, 500 years ago, half a breath after her eyes closed. Let the palace fade. Let the voices quiet. The deep one through the wall last of all, easing now, gentling, going soft. Let your thoughts slow and soften, and finally stop. Tomorrow there will be water to fetch. Tomorrow there will be linen, and mending, and bells. Tomorrow, tomorrow. But tomorrow. Right now there is only the dark and the warmth and the slow breath beside you, and the old house holding you the way it has held its sleepers for 500 years, the same as last night, the same as every night, the same as all the nights stretching out ahead. You are warm enough. You are safe enough. You have done enough. That is enough. Sleep now. Good night.